He has over 150 million views of his TED Talks, including the 6th most watched TED Talk of all time. 100,000 people subscribe to his online courses. He's been featured in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, appeared on BBC, CNN, and The Today Show. And today, Julian Treasure, one of the world's foremost authorities on sound, listening, and speaking, joins us. This is the Curiosity Blueprint, brought to you by Flying House Media. And now, let's get to my conversation with Julian Treasure. For the people that are listening, the people that are watching, and even for myself, you teach over 100,000 people this. You've been seen by 150 million people on TED Talks alone speaking about this. But if I needed to take one step in the right direction to be both a better speaker and a better listener so that I can communicate effectively in my life, what is that first step for each one? What should we all consider starting with?
I think the most important thing is to be conscious that listening is work, that listening is a skill. Because the moment you go through that door and you break through the kind of confusion of listening with hearing, and it's just, oh no, everybody listens, we just do it. No, we don't. You can suddenly open a whole new realm of sensitivity to what's going on around you. You can take responsibility for the sound you surround yourself with, for the sound you make, for how you speak, for how it affects people, for how you relate to other people. Listening underpins all relationships. It's transformational. So be conscious that you are listening or not. You're not always listening. So be conscious when you're not as well. As long as you're conscious, you can continue to work on this and improve it. And that way lies enhanced happiness, effectiveness, and well-being. I promise.
Well, here's something that I found really, really fascinating in preparing for this conversation. You have over 150 million views on your TED Talks, including the 6th most watched of all time. But what's shocking to me was this contrast that what gets the most views significantly are those on speaking. And less, although a significant portion still on listening. But why do you think it is that so many people are inclined to listen to how to speak rather than how to listen?
Well, that's a really good question, because it goes alongside the thing of we teach reading and writing in schools. So there's that dominating speaking and listening. And then when you look at speaking and listening, there's a huge preference for speaking compared to listening. We are much, much keener to be heard than we are to listen. And when you think about it, that doesn't work very well. What's the point of speaking beautifully if nobody's listening? If we put all our energy into sending as opposed to receiving. Now, we could get very metaphysical about this, and, I discuss some of this in the new book. It's quite an interesting question. People used to be much more in connection with the unseen. And sound is an invisible medium. Listening is an invisible sense, generally. It's also very passive, by the way. It's much more of a yin sense, a feminine sense, because sound goes inside your ears. It touches you inside your head. Sound waves actually touch you inside your head. So you're passive in that. Whereas vision is much more active. You know where you're looking. You direct your vision in that way. So the thing about the invisible, I think, is very interesting. For many, many thousands of years in tribal societies, clans, whatever it was, small groups of people, they were very close to death, closer than we are now. We tend to, shovel it away and put it into homes or places we can't see. We don't want to think about it very much. Well, they were much closer to that. So the barrier between the visible world they lived in and the invisible world of spirits, shamans, religion, all sorts of people who are considering what happens after death and the invisible, that connects you a lot more with receiving, I think. Whereas our culture has been so much more about intensity, lots of inputs, seeing, looking at the 3 screens at once. It's much more about going out and getting stuff. It's active and it's much more visual than it is auditory. So, those are some kind of fairly rambling musings on it that I could go on about this for hours, but we are at a stage where I think, speaking is valued more highly than listening. And a lot of people don't listen well. There's a quote by Ernest Hemingway. He said, "I like to listen. I've learned a great deal from listening. Most people never listen." And I think he's still true. That's still true.
I think one of the perhaps misconceptions is I think everybody wants to be heard. I think that is a very important part of human nature, of life, of happiness, is being heard, because being heard is a sense of validation. But I think sometimes it seems we put all of the pressure on the listener to actively listen to us, but we're not paying attention to what we're doing to pique the curiosity to listen to us. And this is a lot of what you talk about, is the way that we speak, whether it's the timbre, the volume, the variations in our voice. We have to, I believe you told Stephen Bartlett, we have to think of how people are listening to us and then adjust the way we speak to kind of pique that curiosity. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. Because everybody's listening is unique, and that's something that very few people understand. It's a very common misconception to assume everybody listens like I do, and they don't. Because we listen through a set of filters, and these are things that grow through our lives, the culture that we're born into, or, perhaps the corporate culture we're living or working in right now. So culture is important. The language we learn to speak, the values, attitudes, and beliefs that we accrete along the way from parents, teachers, role models, friends, whoever it is. We pick some up, we put others down. And you've got different ones to me, and so has every human being. And then in any given situation, we might have expectations about what's going to happen, intentions, assumptions, particularly assumptions about what's going on in somebody's head or how they're responding to us. And we might have emotions. So our listening changes through the day, and it changes from person to person, or from group to group, or audience to audience. So a very, very valuable question is to ask, what's the listening I'm speaking into? And just by asking that question, you'll become more and more sensitive to it. And then, yes, you can adjust your delivery, your content appropriately, because you'll be speaking into the right listening. And I've seen, people flop altogether by doing the wrong thing here, just speaking as if everybody was like them, and they're not. And that can be very, very disconnecting if somebody is just not understanding the whole vibe of an audience or a listener, not thinking about them. Newspaper editors ask their journalists to think always of a question, which is, so what? Why would this matter to the person or people you're speaking to? So what? And, it's so common, given that we are ego-bearing souls. I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle and all his work on getting outside of the ego and becoming bigger than your ego, because the ego wants flattery all the time, wants approbation, it wants approval, it wants to be, bigged up and so forth. And that's where all that kind of, it's the other place where the fascination about speaking compared to listening comes from, because listening is humble. It has to be. It's passive, humble. You're giving somebody your attention, which is a great gift to give to anybody. And speaking, of course, is where you can show off a bit. You can't show off listening, really. It's a quiet gift. So I think, all of that is in play. And when we're speaking, it behooves us very much to think about the listening we're speaking into and to speak kindly into that listening and intelligently and accurately.
That ability to read the room, to understand who you're talking to is incredibly valued. Something that I'm a business leader. I am somebody that pitches to large organizations a lot, presents ideas all the time, leads a team. And I think that is one thing that I'm always in tune to is, how is the room? Are they getting bored? Are they tuning out? Are they scrolling on their notebook, or are they listening intently? And I know that there are some days that I'm better at recapturing that attention than I am at others. But one thing that I notice is that's been effective is when an audience is listening, there is one certain voice that I use to talk to them. And then I notice my voice changes when it's time to really give them an emotional pitch. And it just becomes this, and I don't know where, it wasn't a conscious decision. I think it was more understanding what I like to hear. And when somebody brings that voice down and gets a little bit of gravel in it, I know that I kind of sit up and I start listening a little bit more. What do you see as the most common mistake when people are speaking and trying to engage an audience? And what is it that people like to hear in certain situations?
I think the most common mistake is gabbling. It's a fear of silence. And again, coming back to silence, as I said earlier, it's a great practice to reacquaint oneself with silence, because we're so unfamiliar with it generally, that people actually get into a state where they fear it or feel uncomfortable with it at the very least. As you said, moving out of a city, you felt uncomfortable first. And a lot of people, when they leave a city and go out into the country, they do feel uncomfortable. I think being friendly with silence allows you to regulate your pace far more. It also takes out a lot of those ers, you know what I means, and other little verbal tics, which can become irritating over time. So, you can use silence to emphasize things very well. It's difficult to do on a podcast, because in radio they call it dead air, and it's something to be avoided, because people think they've lost the signal and they start tuning out and going somewhere else. But on stage, when I'm standing on stage and talking to people, I can just stop, and I can stand there for 30 seconds, a minute, and as long as I'm looking calm and not flustered, everybody is thinking, "Oh, it's nice. There's a little break. Wonder what I'll have for lunch," and everybody's fine with it. Nobody's having a problem with that at all. I mean, obviously, if I were going red and sweating and, looking frantic, they'd realize I'd lost my way and so forth. And even then, which is most people's biggest fear of public speaking. I mean, I've seen people do that at TED, who come on and they're doing the most dangerous strategy, which is a speech they've memorized. I can't do that. My memory's not good enough for that.
No.
So I use slides. I know where I'm going. I can see what the next slide is. I don't have anything written. I never read a speech or a talk, but I know what's coming next. Well, I've seen people with a chain of stuff in their memory, and the chain breaks and they're left floundering, going red, and all the rest of it. What happens? Well, TED is not an open mic night at a comedy club where people heckle. What happens is people start applauding. That's always what happens.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. They start to applaud. They say, "Don't worry, we're with you." It's the best way an audience can show appreciation or empathy with a performer or a speaker. Then the speaker will get all flustered and say, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," and go off and get their notes and come back, and everybody applauds, and it all restarts, and everything's fine. You don't die. I mean, I wouldn't want to do that in a comedy club open mic night. I don't have to deal, fortunately, with a lot of heckling. No, that's not my forte, really. But as long as you're talking about an audience who've come to listen to something, you're going to give them a gift. And I always say, when you're at Christmas time or a birthday, I come along and say, "Here's a gift. I've got you a present. I'm happy. I'm excited about doing that." And I give you the gift. Well, that is the way to be on stage. You're there to give a gift. You're going to move people from A to B. You're going to give them something, whether it's educational, amusing, entertaining, intriguing, inspiring, whatever it is. And it's a gift. Oh, they might not all like it, but most of them probably will. That's why they're there. So it's not about you.
That was going to be my question, Julian. Is there pressure in that gift holding up to the expectation? I mean, I can get nervous giving a gift that I really hope somebody likes, and if they don't, I'm crushed. Is that where a lot of that pressure then comes, even if you've shifted that mindset to, I'm giving them a gift, but what if that gift is not well received? How do you bounce back from that?
Yeah, that would be tough. I mean, I haven't had that happen to me very often, because I'm very careful about thinking about what's the listening I will be speaking into. So, I always, if I get an engagement to speak somewhere, it's, who are the audience? How old are they? What's their jobs? Or, what are they doing? What are their pain points? What are they worried about at the moment? How can I help them? What can I give to them that's going to be of value? So I have all those conversations with the organizers in advance in order to try and understand the best gift I can give. So yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Giving a pair of socks to a teenager is perhaps not going to go down too well. And you haven't thought about the listening very much there, have you? So, whereas to your grandfather, lovely, lovely pair of socks. Thank you. So yeah, it is very much about that. What's the listening I will be speaking into? And, none of us are immune. I would be crushed if I gave it my best shot on stage and then, walked off to a desultory, kind of reaction where clearly it had bombed. Doesn't happen very often because I practice the craft. Having said that, of course, you do have to be sensitive to cultures as well. I remember giving a talk in Finland in the amazing concert hall in Helsinki, designed by Mr. Toyota, which has got incredible acoustics. And I absolutely gave it everything. And at the end, it was just like a little tiny ripple of applause, not much at all. And I thought, oh, no, I've bombed. I went down to have a cup of coffee and people were coming up to me saying, thank you, that was the best talk we have had for some years. Well, Finns are very undemonstrative people. They're not like America. I wasn't going to get whooping and hollering as I might do in Chicago. It's a different vibe altogether. So you have to be sensitive also. That's the listening I was speaking into. I didn't know that then. Well, I know it now. And so, it helps to learn this all the time and to be open all the time and to be conscious of what you're doing.
I think what's so important for our listeners, our watchers to understand is that even though the vast majority of us have been born able to speak and able to hear, that these things needed to be treated as a skill. You said you've honed your craft. So this is something that can be worked on, that can be improved. What I wonder from you specifically, because when we see you, we see a finished product or a close to finished product where you're masterful at the way you're able to engage an audience and communicate a clear idea. But you weren't born that way. So when you trained yourself, when you honed this craft, was there a particular area where you found you had to work more, an area that you struggled with in either listening or speaking or even nonverbals?
Well, yes, definitely. As far as speaking, I mean, I am an introvert. And so, and actually, interestingly, as I go around doing talks and I meet other speakers at events and so forth, in my experience, the vast majority of speakers are introverts. It's quite interesting. Not to the point when Susan Cain, for example, I met Susan just before that TED talk. And I remember when she came off stage, I said to her, do you know your life is never going to be the same again after that talk? And it hasn't been. She was a lawyer before she gave that. And now she's an author and has communities about Quiet, which is the book about introverts, and also about being it's not being sad, is it? I can't remember the right word, but it's being in touch with your kind of more subtle, sensitive self. So, I mean, that talk was about introverts, and she owned how introverted she was on stage and how she would prefer to curl up with a book than be anywhere other than on a stage in front of lots of people. Well, lots and lots of introverts adapt to go on stage. So, I have had times where I've regretted not being a Gary Vaynerchuk or a Tony Robbins or somebody who's sort of power, strides about the stage shouting and, having hugely demonstrative and extroverted. Now, I don't know, those two guys might be introverts as well. And maybe they have a persona for stage that is that, but I suspect they're probably quite extrovert. I've regretted not being like that sometimes. When I go to a big event in America, and I'm quiet in English, I worry, is this going to work? Because I'm just me. And even though And you're right. These are skills, and I've practiced and honed these skills. I've trained. I work on it. I've written books about it now. Nevertheless, there are things that one is not. And, when I talk about the four foundations of powerful speaking, hail, honesty, being clear and straight in what you say, authenticity, being yourself, integrity, which is being your word, and love, which is wishing people well. So the A is authenticity, and I kind of come back to that because I think it's very important just actually to be yourself and not try and pretend to be somebody you're not. I'm not saying you can't have a stage persona necessarily, which is maybe a slightly amplified version of who you are because you're on a stage in front of lots of people, and you're doing that one-to-many thing, which isn't necessarily natural. Nevertheless, I think it's important to retain the core of who you are. And if you are a quiet person, there's nothing wrong. I mean, have a look at Susan Cain's talk. It's wonderful, and it's not shouty. So we don't all have to shout. And in fact, I'm glad we don't, because, if people start shouting at each other and not listening, well, that's what's happening in the world at the moment, isn't it? Look at the politics.
Right.
Polarization, demonization, caricature.
And you become deaf to it. If you're constantly shouting, you start to take those words less seriously because it becomes the norm. I will tell you this, Julian, that here's a case for you not having to be demonstrative, is that Americans love an accent. So you've already got us hook, line, and sinker. You don't need to be demonstrative to add to it. We love an accent over here. So
yeah, it's true. I've had that comment many times, and it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Although English people tend to get cast as baddies in Hollywood films, so there is that angle to it as well. The baddie always has an English accent, doesn't he, or she?
That is true. It is very true. I wonder, when you talk about authenticity, I think that's incredibly important, but I think it comes with confidence. And I would tell you myself, our podcast is very young. I'm used to my job being behind the camera. I still talk to people, but I'm not on camera. So this has been an exercise for me in discomfort. And I can tell that even though I'm able to speak and listen clearly, I'm uncomfortable with my body. How do I sit? Is the shirt okay? And so I think there is a major factor in authenticity in being comfortable in your own skin and being confident in how you look. And I think that is a growth that goes even beyond how we speak and listen. How we look and feel can impact both of those.
That's definitely true as well. I think it's important to define who that is for you, so you know how you are going to present yourself in public. I mean, what clothes are you going to wear? Are you a suit and tie person? Or are you Gary Vaynerchuk is always jeans and a t-shirt when he speaks. Tony Robbins, not so much. He would be open neck shirt and a pair of suit trousers or something generally. So I think, most people who do this professionally do think quite carefully about what is my personal brand? How do I express that? You may even have your colors done to find out what works for you and what doesn't, what styles work for you, and then stick with it. Be consistent there, so that people know what they are going to expect. And they, people can read from your clothes some stuff anyway, so you're making a statement there. And other than that, there are exercises you can do. I think breathing is very important, and it's one of the things I train people on for speaking, because your voice is just breath. And stance is extremely important also. And the exercise I love is to imagine a string attached to the top of my head, as often as possible, really, not just when you're standing on a stage or talking to somebody, but, sitting in a chair as well. String attached to the top of your head, your shoulders go down, everything's vertical, and you're nice and relaxed, and you're just hanging from that string. And that's really cool. Then you can just chill and be with it. And if you are standing on a stage and doing that, it does also make everything kind of vertical and comfortable, ready to move. You're not stiff, but you're also not doing anything that's distracting. When all's said and done, none of us, well, very few of us, of course, are really happy with how we look. The ego is in play again there. I wish I could lose a few more pounds. I'm very lucky to have Jane, my fiance, who's a 4-time world champion martial artist and trains me 3 times a week quite hard. So, for somebody of 66, I'm quite flexible and quite strong and, quite healthy. And that is important for speaking as well, because sometimes I'm speaking for an hour and a half. And it's not inconsiderable amount of energy going into that. I get very tired after that kind of thing. So it's important to be looking after yourself. I'm sure you do. Most of the top speakers I know have programs where they look after their physical well-being. And even if you're not a speaker, I mean, my goodness, it's really worth being healthy, isn't it? And that helps. Yeah. But, there's a lot of this stuff where it really is, feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, I don't suppose I'm ever going to think I'm Adonis or anything like that. But, when I walk on stage, I set that stuff aside because it's not about me. And just in the same way, it's not about you right now. You look great on camera, looks fine to me. Everybody watching this will be going, what's he talking about? He doesn't look uncomfortable.
Right, thank you.
So, the little voice in your head, I train people on, this is another form of listening. It's very important, inner listening. And it's really important to understand that little voice in your head is not you. It may be a part of you that perhaps, got hurt as a child or had a bad experience at some point. Don't you dare go on that dance floor. That little voice. If you're not the little voice, who are you? You're the one listening to the little voice. And that puts you in a completely different situation where you can say, okay, thanks for sharing. Now shut up. I'm going to go and dance anyway. So hope that helps.
We tend to trust that voice because it comes through as ourselves. So making that flip and understanding we're just listening to it is important. I want to, if you don't mind, I would love a very brief lesson. But some of the things you talk about that are so fascinating about the voice, like you said, it's just breath. It's breath rubbing against our vocal cords. But when we talk about things like timbre and variation, can you explain a little bit to me what that means and how it is that we can use it, whether it's in our personal lives, our professional lives, if we are speakers or not? How do we use those tools? And I say not, for me, it's not so much so that people listen, but so that people want to listen, so that people become curious about what it is I'm bringing to them.
Well, I think one of the most important principles with all of the tools I talk about is variation. Because the enemy of people being interested, the enemy of engagement is doing something that's repetitive or the same. Well, the ultimate of that, of course, is lack of prosody, speaking all on one note, completely monotone. If I spoke like this the whole time, I think this would be a very, very short podcast. So, there are people who have very, very limited prosody. Prosody is it's a combination of the up and down, the intonation that we use to emphasize words and, finish a sentence. Although if you're Australian or Californian, that tends to get round the wrong way. So you finish a sentence as if it were a question, when in fact it's a statement. That's called questioning intonation. And it's unfortunately quite a weak way to speak because it's kind of eliding a little, is that okay? All the time. So, I mean, if that's anybody listening to this, it's worth training that out of yourself a little bit and remembering the end of a sentence is generally supposed to go down. That's a full stop. So using these tools, I think variation matters a great deal. You can do that with volume as well, or whisper. So if you do that, you're immediately causing people to go, what happened? Anybody who is nodding off. Cadences are very important too. If you get into a repetitive cadence where everything you say goes the same way, you're going to end up with an audience who pretty much are hypnotized and who will go to sleep because, everything's the same. What's he saying? I can't really make it out. The words, it sounds the same all the time. So, and it's actually hypnotizing people. It's putting them into some sort of a coma. So, lack of variation is the cardinal sin of public speaking to me. The first cardinal sin of public speaking. And if you understand that, you can use silence, you can use pace, you can get really excited and go fast, or you can slow right down to make a point. If you watch politicians who are, they're very good at this kind of stuff, even if what they say is unfortunate a lot of the time, then, they're often reading it on an auto cue. And that's a skill in itself. You'll find that there's a lot of what I'm talking about. There's a lot of prosody. There's a lot of variation in pitch, in timbre, in pace, in all of these things, and they're very, very important things to vary. So the more you're aware of the tools in the toolbox, the more you can be. There's a little thing in the back of your brain as you're speaking, going, have I varied my volume recently? Just checking in. It's one of the reasons I love speaking actually on stage, because I think you're never more conscious than you are when 1,000 people are looking at you. I mean, if you're not conscious at that moment, you're never going to be conscious. And so it does cause me to have this kind of multi-tiered consciousness where a big part of me is simply there generating. There's a little part of me going, what's next? What am I doing after this? And there's a little part of me going, how am I doing it? How's the audience? What's the listening doing at the moment? And, have I varied it recently? And so forth. So there's kind of tiers of consciousness going on at the same time. And I think that's a very exciting experience, actually.
Well, I will say it's remarkable how effective it is, because even as you're explaining it to me, I'm expecting you to give me examples, but as you're doing it, I'm leaning closer and closer. It's remarkable just how much it can pique interest and make me more engaged. So it is truly, I think, something that I want to continue to practice and understand now, that we really can bring the audience with us in a wave based on how we speak.
Sure.
And what that brings me to oh, go ahead.
Let me just say one other thing here, which is that there are great tools from history that have largely been forgotten, but good speakers understand them. So it's worth looking up oratory and rhetoric, and the way that people used to use things like the rule of three. I mean, that TED talk that did so well, I came on stage and I said, the human voice. 3, the human voice. So, people use the rule of three a great deal. There are metaphors, stories, all sorts of things that you can weave in, lists, numbers. There's a great deal of stuff from ancient Greece and onwards, which is worth looking up because it can all be used today.
Well, and there's even something in your book from Epictetus when we talk about the great Stoics of the world who had said, we were given 2 ears and 1 tongue. Obviously, he said it much more eloquently, but 2 ears and 1 tongue to be used in that proportion. And I think that's really interesting. And what I want to hear from you, and something that I was particularly intrigued about, is your 4 C's of effective listening, of which I know curiosity is one, which is one of my favorite topics. But for you, as we talk about the skill of speaking, how too can we listen? How too can we think of the skill of listening? What are those 4 C's?
Well, the first C is consciousness, which is to say that you are conscious that you're doing something. Listening is a skill, and it's often confused with hearing, which is a capability. You don't have to do anything to hear. Your ears are doing that all the time automatically, just like your heartbeat is happening automatically, your breathing automatically. You don't have to think. However, listening is different. It's a mental process, and it's work. It's work, which means you need to be conscious that you're doing it. And this is very important to me. I mean, there's nothing wrong with partial listening. If I'm cooking and Jane comes in and starts talking to me, I'm partially listening because I'm cooking. If, however, she comes in and she's really upset about something that happened in the day and she wants to share with me, then I'm either going to say, hold on, let me just put this down and come and listen to you. Or I'll say, just give me 5 minutes. and I'll come sit down with you and listen, because partial listening is not appropriate in that situation. So being conscious of how you're listening is a big part of listening effectively. Being conscious that you're doing something and how am I doing it? That's the first C. The second C is commitment, because if you are going to fully listen, in the sense that, Scott Peck said, you cannot truly listen to another human being without and do anything at the same time. So you need to be fully focused to truly listen, fully listen. Well, if you're going to do that, that takes commitment. You've got to put things down. You've got to avoid distractions. And, here I'm a big proponent for people who say, I've got a boss who never listens to me. I've got a partner, somebody in my family never listens to me. Make an agreement. So, John, I've got something really important to say to you. When can I have 5 minutes of your undivided attention? Can you do that now? No? Tomorrow morning at 10? Perfect. I'll see you then. And then if at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning he starts doing his email, I can say, I think I've got the right to say, John, you did promise me 5 minutes of your undivided attention. So a contract to listen can be very effective that way. And that's commitment. So you can ask other people for it as well as giving it yourself. The third C, as you said, the third C is compassion, which is seeking to understand the other person. Now, I think conscious listening always creates understanding. And that's why it's so important in the world today, and why I'm so concerned with what's happening in politics, in social media, where we're not listening to other people. We're forming small groups of people who are in echo chambers, just reinforcing more and more extreme views. And that's really dangerous for democracy. How can you live next door to somebody you disagree with if you don't seek to understand them a little bit? And that's about validation. I don't agree with you, but I can see why you would believe that. That's very different from you're an idiot, you're wrong, because that is just going to create a fight. Whereas a validated disagreement, then it's possible to say, well, can we put these different perspectives together and create something? So that's very important. And as you said, the final C.
And I don't mean to interrupt you on the 4 C's, but what you just said is something that we were having a conversation before you joined, is that very notion of, it seems that we've, especially in politics, we have disregarded the concept of listening and understanding because we're so focused on being right. I'm not going to validate what you say because I'm going to try and drown it out. I'm going to call you an idiot and then reinforce my beliefs. So that seems to be such a troubling shift, that we're not curious, we're not interested in listening. We are concerned about being right.
So let's weave that into the final C, which is curiosity. And, I love to talk about seeing other people as opportunities to learn, even if it's how you're going to learn how not to do something. There's a humility in that. And that is very much the antithesis of this addiction we have in the world today to being right. And the easiest way to be right, of course, is make somebody else wrong. Hence, we have this blaming culture where, we're addicted to outrage. You look in the papers all the time. Who's to blame? Who's to blame? That's shocking. That's terrible. Somebody should be punished. Blah, 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 blah. That's going on more and more and more. We're getting addicted to it, which is very, very dangerous. We've just seen riots in the UK where totally incorrect information was purveyed by people. And unfortunately now, where once upon a time you'd pass it over a garden fence and you'd be lucky if 10 people passed it on, now within minutes, 1 million people see something and believe it because they don't check and they're not listening carefully, and go out on the streets. So not 1 million, but, a few hundred of them idiots go out on the streets and start throwing stones at the police. Well, that's very, very dangerous. And I do have a concern for democracy if we don't really start to focus on our listening skills. Listening is about being judicious and weighing things up as well. And, we have to be even more careful in an age of deep fakes and, post-truth politics and, bullshit, which is surrounding us all the time now. We've got to be less credulous. We've got to be more careful and more critical in our listening all the time, because otherwise, you'll see herds roaming the streets, herds of idiots roaming the streets, all believing nonsense and being violent as a result, which is, deeply concerning to me.
Well, we see an awful lot of that here in America as well. These knee-jerk reactions, the world is black and white, painting with broad strokes. I think one of the reasons that curiosity has been such an interesting topic to me is I've gotten older, and I've started to understand, to me, what wisdom means. And I think you cannot achieve wisdom unless you've approached life with curiosity. The true desire to learn from somebody, to know that you have things to learn, ways to grow. And what I have found in doing what I do is that when I take a more curious approach, when I don't go in with a script of how I want a conversation to go, I don't go into it thinking, what can I get them to tell me that I need, but instead, what do they need to tell me? That curiosity, I feel, has helped me learn that I am getting a little bit wiser as I get older. And I'm able to borrow ideas. The things I'll take from my conversation with you or somebody else I sit down have become invaluable to me because I feel smarter, I feel wiser, and I feel like I'm able to look at myself in the mirror and say, here's some areas where you can actively grow. So I just think that idea of curiosity and wisdom go so well together, and I don't think you can be a violent overreactor if you are wise enough.
I think that's right. And the other aspect of curiosity, of course, and I've mentioned this word before, is that it's humble. It's like the old story, I think I put it in the book, the story about the Zen master who's visited by a rather arrogant professor who says, tell me about Zen. And the Zen master starts pouring a cup of tea and keeps pouring, and the tea overflows. And the professor says, you're spilling the tea. And the master says, when the cup is full, there is no room for anything else. And, so that's what he's saying is, if you think you know everything, you're going to learn absolutely nothing if you're arrogant like that. And so, yes, curiosity is about being humble. It's about, I don't know everything. I'm keen to learn something. I'm going to learn new things. And as I say, it can be learning how not to do things. Very often it is when you meet somebody who's taking a path that you wouldn't want to take and you can see the consequences. You learn something. Or somebody's making a decision that then has bad consequences. You learn something from their pain or difficulty. So that humility, I think, is critical, and it underpins all listening. So I'm a big fan of humility, absolutely. And, curiosity is a marvelous aspect of that. And it's a great way to be. I mean, my purpose on this planet, apart from my sort of external purpose is to generate listening, but my internal purpose is to grow every day, just a little bit. And that's what it's all about to me.
How do your values then, when you talk about your internal purpose, your values, your non-negotiables, how do you work your own personal values into what you do? Listening is a passion for you, communication, but how do you put yourself into this so that it's not just a topic, but instead a true purpose that you will continue to work towards?
Well, my values, I think I said this in the book, How to Be Heard. My values are faith, love, acceptance, and gratitude, which spell the word flag. I have a very bad memory, so I like acronyms.
Like acronyms, right?
Yeah, big time. I those things all play out in my work, in what I do. I had a big financial blow quite recently. And I've had to have a lot of faith to work through that. Life isn't always easy. And, it's important to me to stay true to my values. I believe if I stay true to my values, all will be well. I mean, that's the faith part of it, really. Just believing that all will be well, ultimately, as opposed to doom and gloom. It might be doom and gloom, but I've had a nicer journey getting there if I've believed all will be well than I would have had if I believed it's going to be doom and gloom every step of the way. Love is wishing people well and, behaving in accordance with that, as well as, of course, deeper love for my family. Acceptance is going with the flow, taking, what is and dealing with it rather than railing about it. And gratitude, of course, really important, to be in the half full, to be in the here and now, what I have got, not the place that many, many people are in, which is happiness is over there. When I get that car, when I get that house, when I get that job, I'll be happy. Well, no, you're only ever happy here and now. Back to Zen again. So yeah, I put all those things in. I'm very grateful, when I get engagements saying I do my best to give them, to do my work with a lot of love, wishing people well. I have faith that this message will get out into the world, and I do my best to accept, the bumps along the way. So, I think I said in the book also, it's amazing to me how few people have actually worked out their values. I talk to a lot of people. Do you have values? And they well, not really. I try to be good. It's really worthwhile to think about this and write them down, just 4 or 5, maybe 3. A handful that you can remember, which are non-negotiables, your North Star, your things that allow you to say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that because it is not in accordance with my values. Or I am going to do that because it's absolutely on track with my values.
Well, I wonder when it comes to those values and you're here and now, you talk about how important living in the present is, which I couldn't agree more with. The past has already happened. The future has yet to happen. So this becomes the only true existence we have, is this very moment. If in this very moment we happen to be in a rough spot, if we happen to be in a dark place, how does that impact our ability to be present? And is there a way to work through that? It seems like it can be insurmountable when things are going poorly to bring yourself into the present. But is there a way that we can do that?
Yes. I try and keep it very simple. It's not often that some awful catastrophe is befalling now. And a lot of the things that can derail us in life are stories in our head about what may happen tomorrow or what might have happened. So it's quite important to, I call those things ghosts. And I try to be very much focused on the here and now. Today, what's the next right thing for me to do? What can I do right now? And being grateful for, actually nothing bad is happening right now. So you can take that approach, right up to the nth degree. If you're waiting to be executed or something, you can still be grateful for every minute up until it, rather than, in dread. If you were, taking that to the extreme, I don't think I'd be able to manage that. But I do think it's very important to focus on the things you have got, the things that are good, because they're there. And it's so easy for us to get diverted into the things we would like to have, we might have had, we haven't got, we lost. They're ghosts. They're not here now. And that's the way I do it, I suppose, is to keep it very much in today.
I cannot thank you enough, Julian, for doing this. I have been eagerly anticipating this conversation, and of course you did not disappoint. So I just want to thank you so much for giving your time and giving me an awful lot to think about. So expect an email when your next book comes out that I'm going to want you to come back on and talk about it. We'll see if we can make that work. But in the meantime, thank you so much for this, and enjoy the rest of your day.
My absolute pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. So enjoy, and you look great on camera. Don't ever forget that.
Thank you so much, Julian. As humans, it seems we're losing our ability to listen to others. And perhaps it's a skill we could all begin to sharpen. Because as Julian pointed out in our conversation, as well as in his books and TED Talks, listening is our access to understanding and human connection. I hope our conversation provided value to even one of you out there listening. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for being curious. If you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button to join our weekly conversations and become a part of our community.